Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. If I was honest, the journey of writing this book started in fourth grade itself when I wrote my first poem. Before that, I never knew I could be good at or enjoyed writing poetry so much. It's truly a surreal experience to have let go of something that stayed in a notebook Mom gifted me, to having it published and it being open to reading to anyone, having an insight into my thoughts through my poems. The catalyst of my journey towards literature was Mom. She would make me read poems to every relative, to every guest, even if it was just about friends or my sister. She would be mesmerized every time, and never came a time when I read my poems to her and Dad and they didn't appreciate them. That's how it went. From me reading my poems to my parents and them appreciating it, to now, when I felt that I could finally give my poems a home in this book. I believe that I get my literary abilities from my father. I have seen him ask me a topic and then write a 2 to 3 page long poem about it in the next hour. He's always been my source of inspiration. And my poem, How Coffee is Made in My Kitchen, is about him. He is someone who shares the same creative space as me and truly guides, encourages, and supports me. No one understands my thought process as much as my father does. Thank you so much, Mom and Dad. I would like to read one of my favorite poems in the book, The Bleeding Heart. I personally prefer to keep the scope of the theme of my poems wide so that anyone reading them could relate them to their lives in more ways than one. This poem is about acknowledging the importance of and prioritizing our roots, which remain constant in our lives, protecting, consoling, and supporting us, in contrast to our temporary petals, which will depart from us one day. Our roots could be anything in our lives. It could be our inner beauty as compared to our physical appearance, our mental peace as compared to the temporary things that stress us, our true happiness over small moments rather than material possessions, our parents, or even our pet. I hope no one complains about the poem not rhyming, just like my brother does. The Bleeding Heart, the message of the poem. The bleeding heart plant has heart-shaped flowers that hang in rows on arcing stems above soft, green foliage. This spring-blooming perennial has a short growing season, and by midsummer, the whole plant dies back to the ground. We are taught to love our petals more than our roots from a very young age. However, in winter, when these petals would depart, what would we love? The Bleeding Heart. The rain-washed earth smelled of petrichor, yet it was the earth that had surpassed others in most pure. As the crisp, invigorating wind dried their wet strands, in the company of its comrade, the sun, during the aurora morning. Recovering suddenly from his supine position, with the mellifluous hums of the rufous nightingale still persistent in his ears, Nadir proclaimed to Aunt Rosalie, "If there exists anything more lovely than this iridescent filter over the earth, then it is the foliage, the violet petals of the bleeding heart. It is indeed what it must be fond of the most about itself, for it is one that appeals the most. But dear, one day this foliage will succumb to the torture inflicted by nature. How is it possible to love something so temporary, so dearly?" Perplexed by the transient quiddity of such beauty, Nadir felt betrayed. Why would the Creator itself uproot the plant whose seed it had sown? Why would the Creator itself take away what was loved the most? The question remained unanswered. Was nature the one to blame? Or are we too naive to comprehend its deeds? Only if one knew that the poetry nature wrote could only be shown, then one would be more attentive to the meanings lesser known. The earthen branches dressed in pure white, as nature's origami commanded through the wind. The only warmth is in the hues of the sun bidding adieu, with the bleeding heart, the cynosure of Nadir's eyes. To him, this was an example of misconduct, for in his plain sight stood the casualty. With his petals swindled and colours waned, little was its beauty and more was its plight. How would this victim make amends with its fate? How would it tolerate acquiescence? Yet every year its fate was concealed, with chances of rebuttal exchanged with resignation. The Bleeding Heart. If even the slightest share of the approbation given to my petals was directed towards these altruistic roots of mine, the disguise as my advocate as the exigencies of the cold demand submission. They are the reason why you will even see me throughout the year. These petals adorning me like jewels are mistaken for the reason of my existence. For when the cold embrace of winter dominates the warmth, they are the first to depart and last to enter. But even in the brutality of the rising waves of the night, holding me towards the shallow waters is my anchor, my roots. To mistake my favorite for the petals is deception, for my source of protection is my faithful ally. Away from your sight and distanced from these ostentatious colors, in the warmth of the blankets of soil, is the part of me I admire the most, is the exquisite beauty of my roots. Thank you.
Wow, Arayna. I just can't wait to have my hands on your book and read all the poems. It was such a lovely perspective. Great.